That night, just before the gala celebrating my daughter-in-law's compassion, she placed a sleeping pill and a glass of water in my hand, whispering that I needed my rest. But I knew it wasn't concern. It was the final brick meant to seal the tomb of my truth. I'm sitting here now, in the guest room of the house that was once mine, looking out at the garden my husband, Max, planted with his own two hands. Everyone in this small town of St. James, Georgia, calls my daughter-in-law, Jessica, a saint. Since she took me in after Max passed, I must have heard those words 100 times. They call her an angel, a blessing. They don't see the way she looks at me when no one else is around. They don't hear the brittle sweetness in her voice, a sound like sugar poured over glass. That night, the night she handed me the pill, I saw it all with perfect, painful clarity. It was the end of a long road. But before I take you down that road with me, wherever you're listening from, would you do an old woman a favor? Just like this story or leave a little comment below. It helps me to know that someone, somewhere, is listening. My life here is quiet, too quiet. Every morning, I make myself a cup of coffee, the instant kind since the fancy coffee maker Jessica bought feels too complicated for my hands, and I sit by this window. I watch the neighbors wave as Jessica pulls out of the driveway in her clean, sensible SUV on her way to the foundation's office. They admire her. I understand why. She always has the right smile ready, the right word of sympathy at the right time. She's a performer, and this whole town is her stage. Just last week, we had a few guests over for dinner. Some important people from our church. The air was filled with the scent of roasted chicken and Jessica's expensive scented candles. It was all very pleasant. I was in the middle of a story telling them how my mother used to save crushed eggshells to feed her tomato plants. It's a little trick that's given me the best tomatoes in the county for 50 years. I was just getting to the good part, remembering how Mama's hands, caked with dirt, looked so strong and capable. Jessica laughed. It was a beautiful sound, light and airy, and it cut right through my sentence. "Oh, Mom," she said, her voice dripping with a kind of fond pity. She reached over and patted my hand. "Bless your heart. Nobody uses those old-fashioned methods anymore." She turned her dazzling smile to the rest of the table, a smile that included everyone but me. She's still living in the past. The table chuckled along with her. It wasn't mean-spirited laughter. It was agreeable, the kind of sound people make when they're in the presence of someone they admire. But to me, each little laugh was like a shove. In that moment, I felt myself shrink. I wasn't a person at the table anymore. I was an anecdote. An old, dusty photograph hung crooked on the wall. They were all looking at me, but I had become completely invisible. Jessica is very, very good at caring for me. That's the word she always uses. "You don't need to worry about a thing, Mom," she'd say, breezing into a room. "You just rest. I'll handle everything." It sounds wonderful, doesn't it? Like a gift. But her care always comes at a cost. It started with the mail. About a month ago, I realized I hadn't seen a single piece of mail with my name on it. No bank statements, no utility bills, not even the gardening magazine I'd subscribed to for 30 years. It was strange. The mailbox is right at the end of the drive. I used to enjoy the little walk. I finally asked her about it one evening. She was on her laptop at the kitchen island, the blue light of the screen making her face look cold and distant. She didn't even look up. "Oh, that," she said, her fingers clicking away on the keyboard. "I had everything rerouted to the foundation's office. I just stood there, my heart starting to beat a little faster. You did what? Why? To help you, of course, she said, finally glancing at me over the top of her screen. Her expression was one of patient exasperation, the look you'd give a child who'd asked a silly question. It's just one less thing for you to worry your head about. She didn't ask me. She didn't consult me. She just did it. She took away my right to know about my own life, to see my own bills, to hold my own letters in my hands, and she wrapped it up in the pretty paper of her concern. I felt a profound sense of loss, a quiet theft I couldn't even properly name. That feeling of being erased started to spread. My friends, the ones I used to chat with on Facebook every few days, seemed to go quiet. Now, I'm no expert with computers, but I know how to send a message. I know how to look at pictures of my best friend Martha's grandkids. One afternoon, I tried to log in to do just that, but the website told me my password was incorrect. I tried again, slowly, making sure I typed each letter perfectly. Nothing. I was certain it was the right one. I've used the same password for everything since Max first helped me set up the account. It was his birthday, not something I'm likely to forget. Jessica found me there, staring at the screen with a frown. She came up behind me and placed her hands on my shoulders. Her touch felt heavy. "Let me help, Mom," she said, her voice soft and soothing. In a few quick clicks, she was in. "There," she said. "I changed the password for you a while back. I was worried about all those online scams targeting seniors. It's just so dangerous these days." She opened my page for me, but it felt like walking into a stranger's house. Things were missing. A few comments I remembered leaving on Martha's photos were gone. The chain of messages between me and my cousin had vanished. It was subtle, like someone had come in and tidied up my memories without my permission. She was methodically, quietly, snipping the threads that connected me to my world, and she was telling me it was for my own safety. The house started to feel less like a home and more like a beautifully decorated cage. Max, my late husband, was the hardest working man I ever knew. He spent his whole life at the paper mill, coming home every evening smelling of sulfur and honest sweat. We never had much, but we had a good life, a decent life. We saved what we could. Then the Great Recession hit in 2008. It felt like the world fell out from under us. We lost nearly half of our retirement savings. I remember the look on Max's face, the grayness of it, as he stared at the bank statement. It broke something in him for a while. This house, the one I'm sitting in now, and a few cherished belongings were what we managed to hold on to. They were more than just things. They were proof that we had survived. The most precious of those things was his Hamilton watch. The company gave it to him on his retirement day. It wasn't just the gold casing I treasured. It was the 40 years of his life it represented. 40 years of getting up before dawn, of long shifts and tired bones. It was his sweat, his dedication, ticking away under that little glass dome. Jessica knew what that watch meant to me. She knew I'd wind it every Sunday morning, just as he had. She knew. And that's the first thing she came for. She came home one afternoon with a troubled look on her face. It was a carefully constructed expression of sorrow. She sat down next to me on the sofa, her posture radiating a heavy sense of purpose. She took my hands in hers. Her skin was smooth and cool. She told me a story about a veteran's family, right here in our community, who were about to lose their home. "They're going to be on the street, Mom," she said, her voice thick with emotion. I could picture it. A man who had served his country, now unable to provide a roof for his own children. Then she brought up the watch. Her timing was perfect. "I know how much it means to you," she said, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "But just think of it. Dad's legacy, his lifetime of hard work, being used to help a man who served our country. Isn't that exactly what he would have wanted?" The next day, she even arranged a phone call. A woman's voice, trembling and grateful, came through the line, thanking me, blessing me for my generosity. I wept. Of course I wept. I believed her. I agreed to sell the watch, to let go of that piece of Max, because I believed in the goodness of my daughter-in-law. Doubt is a funny thing. It's like a tiny seed. Once it's planted, it finds a way to sprout in the dark. A few weeks after the watch was gone, I was reading the local paper, the St. James Chronicle, and saw a small piece about Jessica's foundation. They were celebrating a successful fundraising drive for a new playground in the town park. It was a lovely project, with pictures of swings and slides, but there wasn't a single word about a veteran's family. Not one mention. I told myself it must have been a private donation, that they wanted to remain anonymous. But the little nagging feeling wouldn't go away. I started to pay more attention. It wasn't a conscious decision, more like a shifting of focus. My eyes started to catch things I had previously ignored. The new designer handbag Jessica brought home. The weekend trips to expensive spas she dismissed as necessary de-stressing from all the charity work. And I started to wonder, truly wonder, where my husband's legacy, all those years of hard work condensed into a small gold circle, had really gone. The doubt inside me grew with each passing day, a quiet, insistent hum beneath the surface of our peaceful home. I couldn't ignore it any longer. That evening, Jessica was showing me pictures on her phone from her latest de-stressing weekend, a beautiful resort by a lake. The photos were filled with sunshine, fancy meals, and Jessica's serene, smiling face. My own life felt so small and gray in comparison. I took a deep breath, the air feeling thin and hard to draw in. "That trip looks expensive," I said. My voice sounded frail, but I tried to keep it steady. "The foundation must be doing very well these days." The smile on Jessica's face didn't just vanish. It froze, cracking at the edges. The warmth in her eyes was replaced by something sharp and cold, like a sudden frost. She didn't answer my question. She just slowly lowered her phone, stood up, and walked into her home office, closing the door behind her with a soft but definitive click. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. I knew in that moment that I had stumbled into a forbidden place. I had dared to question the saint. A few days later, Pastor John came to visit. Of course, Jessica had gotten to him first. I can picture the scene so clearly in my mind. Jessica, sitting in his office, her eyes filled with crocodile tears, speaking in a pained, loving voice about her poor, confused mother-in-law. She would have told him I was struggling with depression, that my memory was failing, that I was becoming paranoid and making up stories. She was a master storyteller, and he, a good and kind-hearted man, had believed every word. He sat in my living room, in Max's old armchair, and took my hand. His own was warm and dry. He spoke to me about the importance of faith, of trust, of letting go of earthly anxieties. "Anne," he said, his voice gentle and full of misplaced concern, "Jessica loves you so dearly. Sometimes, At our age, our minds can play tricks on us. Try to put your worries aside and trust in her goodness. His words felt like stones, not because they were unkind, but because they were meant to be kind. Jessica hadn't just stolen my money or my memories. She was now stealing my sanity in the eyes of the world. She had taken my faith, my last and most profound refuge, and twisted it into a weapon to be used against me. How could I fight a narrative that God's own representative in St. James believed to be true? That night, I knelt by my bed to pray. The floor felt cold through my thin nightgown. I prayed for strength, for clarity, for a sign. But for the first time in my 78 years, the words felt hollow. They seemed to rise no higher than the ceiling of my room. A terrible, crushing loneliness settled over me, a loneliness deeper than the one I felt in the empty days after Max's funeral. It felt as if God himself had been taken in by her performance, as if even he was no longer listening. My book club was one of my last remaining joys. It was a small group of women I'd known for decades. In that circle, I wasn't Jessica's mother-in-law. I was just Anne. The morning of our monthly meeting, I was getting ready, feeling a little flicker of anticipation, but I couldn't find my hearing aid. I always kept it in a little porcelain dish on my nightstand. I searched everywhere, my hands starting to tremble with frustration. Finally, Jessica appeared in the doorway, holding it out in the palm of her hand. "Looking for this, Mom?" she asked, her voice syrupy sweet. It was on the kitchen counter. I'm so clumsy I think I must have spilled a little water on it. She handed it to me. The tiny device was damp and silent. There was no life in it, and I knew with a certainty that made me feel sick that it was no accident. At the meeting, I sat among my dearest friends, surrounded by their familiar voices and laughter, but all I could hear was a dull, persistent buzzing. It was like watching a play from behind a thick pane of glass. I smiled and nodded, trying to follow the conversation by reading their lips, but I felt utterly disconnected, isolated by a wall of silence Jessica had built just for me. My confusion at the book club, of course, became another chapter in the story of my decline. Jessica recounted the incident to our mutual friends with a performance of deep, dramatic concern. "Poor Mom," she'd say, her voice hushed. "She's getting more and more confused. She just seemed completely lost." She never mentioned the water, of course. She only described the result. She was painting a portrait of me, one careful brushstroke at a time. The portrait of a pitiable, senile old woman who needed special care, and everyone believed her. I could see it in their eyes. They started looking at me with pity. And I learned something in those weeks. Pity can be crueler than hatred. Hatred at least acknowledges you as a person, an opponent. Pity turns you into an object, a charity case, stripping you of your dignity until there's nothing left. That night, I had a dream about Max's garden. In the dream, the flower beds were choked with thick, ugly weeds. They were strangling the roses he had loved so much. I tried to pull them out, but their roots went impossibly deep. The more I pulled, the faster they grew, their tendrils wrapping around my ankles, pulling me down into the dirt. I woke with a gasp, my heart pounding against my ribs. The moon was still high in the sky. I slipped out of bed and went to the back porch, looking out at the real garden. It was still neat and tidy, just as Jessica's landscapers kept it. But I couldn't shake the feeling from the dream. The weeds were her lies. They were spreading, rooting themselves in everyone's minds, and they were slowly, surely suffocating me. I knew then I had to do something before they swallowed me whole. Since the bank statements no longer came to the house, I knew I had to go to the source. The feeling of having to be deceitful in my own home was a bitter pill to swallow, but I saw no other way. I told Jessica I was going for a walk in the park, a simple stroll to get some air. She just nodded, barely looking up from her phone, probably relieved to have me out of the house for an hour. The bank felt cold and impersonal. The young teller, a girl no older than my granddaughter Lily, seemed hesitant when I asked for a printout of my recent transaction history. "Mrs. Anderson," she said, her eyes shifting uncomfortably, "your daughter-in-law is listed as the primary contact on this account. She requested that all correspondence go through her." My voice was thin, but firm. "This is a private matter, dear. An urgent one." I must have looked desperate, because after a moment she relented. I sat on the hard vinyl chair in the waiting area, the flimsy piece of paper trembling in my hands, and then I saw it. A single line item from the previous week. A withdrawal, $5,000. The numbers swam before my eyes. My breath caught in my chest. That was a huge portion of what little savings Max and I had managed to scrape back together after the crash. It felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. I couldn't breathe. That evening, I waited until Jessica was sitting at the dinner table. I walked over and placed the bank statement on the polished wood surface in front of her. For the first time in months, a tiny spark of power flickered within me. It was extinguished almost immediately. Jessica didn't flinch. She picked up the paper, glanced at it, and then looked at me with an expression of carefully crafted compassion. "Oh, Mom," she said, her voice as smooth as silk. "This must be so confusing for you. This was the anonymous donation you wanted to make to that church in the next county, the one that had the fire. Don't you remember?" I stared at her, my mind a complete blank. A fire? A church? I don't remember that at all. Jessica let out a long, theatrical sigh, the kind one reserves for a difficult but beloved burden. She walked over to a filing cabinet in the corner of the room and pulled out a folder. From it, she produced a single sheet of paper. It was a withdrawal slip, and at the bottom, there was my signature. "See?" she said gently. "It's right here." I took the paper. My hand was shaking so badly the paper rattled. It looked like my signature. It was my name, spelled correctly. But something was wrong. It was too neat, too perfect. It lacked the slight, wavering tremor of a 78-year-old hand. It was the signature of a ghost. "I didn't sign this," I whispered, the words barely audible. Jessica put her hand on my shoulder. To anyone watching, it would have looked like a comforting gesture. To me, it felt like a clamp. "Mom, we've talked about this. The doctor said your memory might have some lapses." She was doing it, taking the truth and bending it into a pretzel right before my eyes. She was using my age as a weapon, turning my own mind into a hostile witness against me. I looked into her eyes, searching for a flicker of deceit, a crack in the facade. I found nothing but a cold, clear pity. And for a terrifying moment, I started to question myself. Was it possible? Could I have signed it and simply forgotten? The feeling of doubting your own mind is a deeper horror than losing money. It's an earthquake that shakes the very foundation of who you are. But Jessica's cruelest weapon wasn't her lies about money. It was my love for my granddaughter, 8-year-old Lily. She knew how much I adored that child. That weekend, Lily came running into my room, her face glowing with excitement. She was clutching a brand new American Girl doll, still in its box. It was one of the expensive ones. "Look, Grandma," she squealed, her eyes shining. "Mommy Jessica said it's a special gift from you." My heart seized in my chest. I knew nothing about this doll, and I knew exactly whose money had paid for it. But how could I tell my precious granddaughter that her mother was a liar? How could I watch the joy drain from her face? I looked up and saw Jessica standing in the doorway, a serene smile on her lips. She knew she had me. She had won. She had taken the purest thing in my life, my love for my grandchild, and turned it into a cage, locking me in with my own silence. In all this suffocating loneliness, I had one friend left, my old cat, Patches. She was a Calico Max, and I had adopted from the shelter 15 years ago. She was slow-moving now, her days mostly spent sleeping on my floral armchair. Whenever Jessica cut me with her words or her calculated kindness, I would go to that chair and sink my hands into Patch's soft, warm fur. Her steady, rumbling purr was the only honest sound in the whole house. She didn't judge me. She didn't pity me. She just was. I started whispering things to her, secrets I didn't dare say out loud. "She's lying, Patches," I'd murmur into her fur. "I know she's lying." The old cat would just press her head into my hand, a silent, comforting presence. And in those moments, feeling her solid warmth against my skin, I knew I wasn't crazy. It was the doll, that cruel trick involving Lily, that finally broke something open in me. Seeing my unconditional love used as a tool for manipulation, for a kind of casual torture, shifted something deep inside. The fear and self-doubt that had been churning in my gut for months began to recede, replaced by a slow-burning anger. It wasn't a hot, loud rage, but a cold, hard certainty. That night, for the first time, I didn't feel helpless. I walked to the bookshelf in my room and took down my old Bible, the leather cover worn smooth by years of use. But I wasn't looking for comfort this time. I was looking for strength. Opened it to the Psalms, the words of David crying out in the wilderness, and I felt a sense of resolve settle in my bones. I could not be silent any longer. This wasn't about the money anymore, or even about the house. This was a fight for my own soul. The decision didn't come to me in a flash of lightning. It was more like a slow, quiet sunrise. I knew I couldn't confront Jessica directly. That was her arena, her stage. She could twist words until they meant the opposite of what you intended. I would lose that fight. No, I had to do something else. I had to gather the truth. I found an old, slim notebook in the back of my dresser drawer, one I'd bought years ago and never used. I hid it at the bottom of my knitting basket, tucked beneath skeins of wool, and I started to write. I wrote down everything: the date the watch was sold, the morning my hearing aid was accidentally broken, the day the $5,000 vanished from my account. I wrote down the things she said, the pitying looks, the cold silences. My hands ached from the effort, but with every word I put on the page, my mind felt clearer. Each letter was a small stone, and I was slowly, secretly, building a fortress of my own reality. I knew I couldn't do this alone. I needed an ally, someone from the outside who hadn't been charmed by Jessica. The only person I could think of was my younger sister, Carol. She lives down in Florida, and we don't talk as often as we should, but there's a bond there, a deep-rooted love. The problem was, Jessica was always home. There was no privacy, no way to make a call without being overheard. I had to wait for an opportunity. It came on a Tuesday. Jessica had a long lunch meeting with some potential donors for the foundation. I watched from the window as her car disappeared around the corner. My hands were trembling as I picked up the phone and dialed Carol's number. It had been nearly a year since we'd last spoken. When I heard her voice, so warm and familiar, a wave of relief washed over me so powerful it almost brought me to tears. "Carol," I began, my own voice tight with unshed emotion. "Carol, something's happening here." But before I could get another word out, she cut me off. Her voice was filled with a deep sisterly concern. "Oh, Anne, I'm so glad you called. Jessica called me last week. She told me everything." My blood ran cold. "Told you? Told you what?" "She told me you haven't been well," Carol said, her voice dropping. "That you've been deeply depressed since Max passed. That sometimes you get confused and invent these painful stories to get attention." I stood there in the silent kitchen, the phone pressed hard against my ear, utterly speechless. She had gotten there first. She had called my only sister, my last hope, and poisoned the well before I even had a chance to draw a single cup of water. She had taken my desperate plea for help and labeled it as a symptom of a disease. "That's not true, Carol," I tried to explain, my voice cracking, but I could hear the doubt in her silence, the wall that Jessica had already built between us. "Honey, maybe you should listen to Jessica," she said softly, her voice full of a gentle, misguided kindness. "She just wants what's best for you." I hung up the phone. The feeling of defeat was absolute, a physical weight pressing down on my chest. My last road to rescue was blocked. Jessica had isolated me perfectly. I was well and truly alone now. I looked at the little notebook sitting on the table. My words, my truth. That was all I had left. And I realized, with a stark and chilling clarity, that if no one else in the world was going to believe me, then I had to believe in myself. This was a battle I would have to fight on my own. That failed phone call taught me something vital. Jessica wasn't just a liar. She was a strategist. She anticipated my moves before I even made them. A few days later, I overheard her on the phone in her office. The door was slightly ajar. She was talking to a board member from the foundation, a man named Mr. Henderson who, I gathered, was asking some pointed questions about expenses. Jessica's voice, when she replied, was a masterpiece of wounded fragility. She started to cry, soft, believable sobs. She spoke of the incredible burden of caring for her ailing mother-in-law, how the stress was taking a toll, and how some of those expenses were just small comforts to keep her own spirits up so she could continue her important work. I heard Mr. Henderson's tone shift immediately from accusatory to apologetic. She had stolen my pain, my reality, and was wearing it like a costume to deflect from her own corruption. Meanwhile, the whole town was gearing up for the annual charity gala. This year's guest of honor, the recipient of the St. James Humanitarian Award, was none other than Jessica, the Saint of St. James, the flyers called her. It was to be her coronation, the night the entire town would gather to celebrate her goodness. She was a whirlwind of activity, phone calls, dress fittings, speech rehearsals. In her flurry of self-aggrandizement, she barely paid any attention to me at all, and that was exactly what I needed. Her distraction was my opportunity. I kept writing in my notebook, and I began to form a plan. The gala would be her stage, but I would be the one to write the final act. 2 days before the gala, Jessica called me into the living room. The sweet facade was gone. Her face was a mask of cold determination. She motioned for me to sit, then placed a sheaf of papers on the coffee table between us. "Sign these," she said. It wasn't a request. I picked them up. My reading glasses were in my pocket, but I didn't need them to understand. It was a deed of gift, a legal document to donate the house, my house, to the St. James Foundation. My name was already typed in, a blank line waiting next to it. Beside that document, she placed another, a glossy, full-color brochure. The cover showed a cheerful-looking brick building surrounded by green lawns. The words on it read, "Golden Meadows Senior Living, your golden years in good hands." "I don't want it to come to this," Jessica said, her voice flat, devoid of any emotion. "But your doctor and Pastor John both agree. You need professional, around-the-clock care. If you're not capable of making sound decisions for yourself, Mother, then others will have to make them for you. Golden Meadows." I knew the place. It was on the edge of town, set back from the road behind a tall wrought iron fence. People said it was a fine facility, but to me, in that moment, the name sounded like a life sentence. Jessica's threat was no longer just about money or property. It was about my freedom. She was telling me, in no uncertain terms, that if I didn't give her my home, she would take my life. She would have me locked away, and the world would applaud her for being such a caring, dutiful daughter-in-law. I looked into her eyes. I didn't see the woman my son had married. I saw a jailer. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just looked past her, through the window, at the old oak tree in the front yard that Max and I had planted the year we were married. I took a long, slow breath, feeling the air fill my lungs. And in that moment, a strange calm washed over me. The fear was still there, but it was distant. I felt like a sailor who sees the hurricane on the horizon and knows there is no escape, only the storm itself. I reached for the pen she had placed on the table. A slow, triumphant smile spread across Jessica's face. She thought she had broken me. She thought she had won. As my fingers closed around the pen, my mind went to a place she could never touch. I wasn't thinking about the wood and plaster of this house. I was thinking about 2008. I was remembering Max's face, pale and drawn, as he looked at the statement that told us our life's savings had been cut in half. This house wasn't just an asset. It was a testament to our resilience. It was the fortress we had defended against the uncertainties of the world. To sign that paper wasn't just to give away a building. It was to erase my husband's legacy of perseverance. It was to surrender finally to the very crisis that had almost destroyed him. I didn't sign. I simply set the pen down on the table beside the papers. "I need some time to think," I said, my voice quiet but firm. Jessica stared at me, momentarily stunned by even this small act of defiance. Her face darkened. "You don't have much time," she hissed, before turning on her heel and leaving the room. The next 2 days passed in a heavy, oppressive silence. Jessica treated me like a ghost, moving past me in the hallways as if I wasn't there. Her phone calls were whispered, her movements quick and secretive. The entire house seemed to be holding its breath. I spent most of my time in the garden, my hands in the cool soil, turning the earth over, pulling small weeds. My body was working, but my mind was arranging my plan piece by piece. The night before the gala, the house buzzed with a false electric excitement. Jessica paraded in front of the hall mirror in her evening gown, a shimmering sheath of emerald green. She was completely absorbed in her impending glory. She treated me as if I were a problem already solved. Later, As I was getting ready for bed, she came into my room. In her hand, she held a glass of water and a small pale blue pill. This time, there were no pretenses. "Take this," she commanded, her voice low and sharp. "I need you to be calm. Tomorrow." It wasn't a suggestion. It was the final ultimatum. I looked at the small pill resting in her open palm. It was tiny, almost insignificant, but it held all of her calculation, all of her cruelty. Its purpose was brutally clear. She wanted me on that stage tomorrow night looking tired, docile, perhaps a little confused. She needed me to be the living embodiment of her narrative, the poor, frail old woman who required her saintly protection. I was to be the silent, pathetic prop for her false compassion. Our eyes met. In hers, I saw an icy resolve. She had reached her endgame and would not be turned back. I took the pill from her. I took the glass of water. "Thank you, dear," I said, my voice deliberately weak. A small, satisfied smile touched her lips. She patted my hand, a gesture of finality, and then she was gone, leaving me alone with my choice. I heard her footsteps retreat down the hall. She was probably already dreaming of her acceptance speech, of the applause that would rain down on her. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the little blue dot in my hand. A whole world of silent, foggy submission rested there. But Jessica didn't know everything about me. She saw a frail old woman, but she didn't see the survivor. She didn't know about the long, grueling weeks I spent by Max's side in the hospice wing of the hospital. In that place of quiet desperation, I had learned many things. I'd learned how to read medical charts, how to talk to nurses, and how to deal with the bitter pills that my proud husband refused to swallow. From a kind, world-weary nurse, I learned the simple, sleight-of-hand trick of hiding a pill under my tongue. It was a small skill, born of love and desperation, a way to protect his dignity while still getting him the medicine he needed. I never imagined I would have to use it again, especially not like this. I raised the pill to my lips, took a large sip of water, and made a great show of swallowing, even making a small gulping sound. Jessica might have been listening from the hall. I had to be convincing. I sat on the bed for a long while, letting the minutes tick by, until I was sure she believed me to be drifting off to sleep. Then, moving silently, I padded into the adjoining bathroom. I let the small blue pill fall from under my tongue into my palm and tucked it away at the bottom of my daily vitamin bottle where it would never be found. I took one of my harmless white calcium tablets, crushed it into a fine powder with the back of a spoon, and stirred the dust into the remaining water in the glass, clouding it just enough. I placed the now empty glass on my nightstand. The evidence was gone. I did not sleep that night. My mind was sharper and clearer than it had been in years. I sat in the armchair by the window, watching the moonlight paint silver shadows across the garden. The fear was gone, replaced by a profound, focused calm. I took out my little notebook one last time. I read through my own words, not to relive the pain, but to organize the facts into a simple, unshakable timeline. I wasn't preparing for an argument. I was preparing for a testimony, but it would not be mine. When the first pale rays of dawn crept through the window, a sense of peace settled over me. I had been pushed to the very edge of my endurance, and I had not broken. I chose my best dress, a simple cornflower blue one that Max had always said brought out the color in my eyes. I brushed my hair until it shone. I was not a victim preparing for defeat. I was a survivor preparing to tell her story. Tonight, the town of St. James would honor a saint, but they were about to hear the truth from someone who had lived in her shadow. The gala was as grand as I had imagined. It was held at the downtown Marriott, in a ballroom with crystal chandeliers that dripped light onto the sea of well-dressed people. The air hummed with polite conversation and the soft strains of a string quartet. Jessica was the star of the evening. When her name was called, she glided to the stage amidst a roar of applause. She looked radiant in her emerald gown, a vision of grace and benevolence. Her speech was flawless, every word polished, every pause perfectly timed. She spoke of compassion, of service, of our duty to the community's most vulnerable. I sat at a table near the front, next to Pastor John, a silent observer in a blue dress. I may have looked frail to them, a forgotten footnote in her glorious story, but inside, my mind was as sharp and cold as a shard of glass. And then she turned her attention to me. "I want to dedicate this award to one extraordinary woman," she said, her voice catching with practiced emotion. "My beloved mother-in-law, Anne. She is my inspiration. Seeing her fragility in her twilight years is what motivated me to dedicate my life to caring for our elders." She produced a single, perfect tear that traced a shimmering path down her cheek. The room was captivated. Women at the next table dabbed at their eyes with cocktail napkins. They looked over at me with such profound sympathy, as if I were a delicate, wounded bird. They had no idea that I was the one they needed protection from. "And now," Jessica announced, her voice still trembling with false emotion, "I'd like to invite my mother up here to share this moment with me." It was her masterstroke, the final piece of theater. Bring the drowsy, confused old woman, drugged into submission, onto the stage. Let everyone see the heavy cross she so nobly bore. All eyes turned to me. A wave of encouraging applause rippled through the room. My hand trembled slightly as I placed it on the table to push myself up, but it wasn't from fear. I stood, and I walked toward the stage, my steps slow but steady. Jessica met me at the stairs, wrapping an arm around mine in a gesture of loving support. As we reached the center of the stage, she leaned in close, her breath warm against my ear, and whispered words meant only for me. "Just smile, Mom." She hadn't noticed the clarity in my eyes. She hadn't registered my steady gait. She was too lost in the glow of her own triumph. The stage lights were blindingly bright. I could see hundreds of faces looking up at me, a blur of expressions. I recognized my friends from the book club, the young teller from the bank, even Mr. Henderson, the accountant who had dared to question her. They were all here, the entire cast of her elaborate play, ready for the final scene. The master of ceremonies, a man with a dazzling white smile, handed me a microphone. It felt surprisingly heavy in my hand. "Mrs. Anderson," he beamed, "would you like to say a few words about your wonderful daughter-in-law?" Jessica stood beside me, her arms still linked through mine, her face a perfect portrait of humble pride, ready to receive her final accolades. I brought the microphone to my lips. The ballroom fell silent, a hush of anticipation. They were waiting, perhaps, for a few mumbled, disconnected words of thanks, the confused ramblings of a woman fading from the world. Jessica squeezed my arm gently, a silent reminder of my role. I took a deep breath. The air tasted of expensive perfume and roast beef. I did not look at Jessica. I looked straight out, over the lights, into the faces of my neighbors, my friends, the people of this town who had believed a beautiful lie. And then I began to speak. My voice, when it came, was not weak or trembling. It was clear and it was strong. Tonight, I began, my voice carrying to every corner of the silent room. I don't want to talk about my daughter-in-law. A collective intake of breath, a ripple of surprise. Jessica froze beside me. Her smile faltered, becoming a rigid mask. She tried to tug at my arm, a subtle attempt to pull me back, but I stood my ground. Tonight, I continued, pausing to let the words sink in, I want to tell you a story about a very dear friend of mine, a friend who taught me a great deal about the power of the truth. Jessica's play was over. My story was about to begin. This friend of mine, I continued, my voice even and calm. She's a widow too. After her husband died, she went to live with her son's family, a family deeply respected in their community for their charitable works. I allowed myself a quick glance at Jessica. She was trying to hold her smile in place, but it looked brittle, like a pane of glass about to shatter. My friend was so grateful. She thought she had found a safe harbor for her final years. But then strange things began to happen, I said, my eyes scanning the crowd. First, her new daughter-in-law convinced her to sell her late husband's treasured retirement watch, a family heirloom, to raise money for a veteran's family in need. My friend never heard another word about that family. I saw Mr. Henderson, the accountant, narrow his eyes slightly. Then all of my friend's mail, especially her bank statements, started being delivered to a different address without her knowledge. The reason she was given? To help her have less to worry about. At a table in the middle of the room, the young bank teller looked down at her hands, her face flushed with sudden understanding. My friend started to feel very alone, I went on. Her hearing aid was accidentally damaged right before her book club meeting, making her appear confused and senile in front of her oldest friends. I saw the women from my club exchange uneasy glances. They remembered that day. They remembered my bewildered silence. Worse, when she tried to voice her concerns, she was gently admonished by her own pastor to be more trusting and less paranoid, because her daughter-in-law had already visited him with a very different, very convincing story. I looked directly at Pastor John. The color drained from his face. Once, I said, and now my voice did begin to tremble, not from weakness but from the weight of the memory. My friend discovered that $5,000 was missing from her savings account. When she confronted her daughter-in-law, she was shown a forged withdrawal slip and told she had simply forgotten that she'd signed it. I paused. The silence in the room was absolute, but I could feel the whispers starting, the frantic, unspoken connections being made. This was no longer a story about a nameless friend. And just last night, I said, my voice hardening to a point of steel, my friend was handed a sleeping pill and told to sign away the deed to her home, with the threat that if she refused, she would be committed to the Golden Meadows nursing facility. I placed the microphone back in its stand. I didn't need to say anything more. I hadn't made a single accusation. I had simply told a story. But the truth in that story was more powerful than any accusation could ever be. There was no applause, only a stunned, cavernous silence that filled the entire ballroom. And then, every eye in the room, as if pulled by a single string, shifted away from me and settled on Jessica. Her face was ashen. The saintly mask had not just cracked, it had disintegrated. leaving behind something small and ugly. She opened her mouth, stammering, trying to form a word, a denial, anything, but no sound came out. My story, the story of a friend, had dismantled her entire world of lies. I turned, and with the help of the stunned master of ceremonies, I slowly walked down the steps from the stage, leaving Jessica alone in the spotlight, drowning in the crushing silence of judgment. The silence finally broke, not with applause, but with a tidal wave of whispers that swept through the ballroom. People turned to each other, their faces a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension. The play was over. The harsh stage lights now seemed to mock Jessica, who stood frozen for a moment longer before she turned and fled, scurrying off the stage and disappearing through a side exit. She didn't offer a defense. She didn't make an excuse. She simply ran. That silent escape was a confession more damning than any words. The town had just watched their saint abandon the stage. The gala ended in a cloud of awkward confusion. The party was over, but the story was just beginning. As I made my way off the stage, people started to approach me, not with pity anymore, but with a new respect in their eyes. The ladies from my book club were first. Margaret, the eldest among us, took both my hands in hers. "Anne," she said, her eyes wet with tears, "we are so sorry. We didn't see." Then came Mr. Henderson, the accountant. He simply nodded at me, a sharp, respectful dip of his head. "That was a very brave thing you did," he said, his voice low. Even the young bank teller found me, whispering that she would be happy to be a witness, to tell the authorities everything she knew about the account. I went home alone that night. Jessica never came back. The house was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet. It wasn't the oppressive silence of before. It was a peaceful silence. I walked through the rooms, my hand trailing along the familiar furniture. Nothing had changed, yet everything was different. I was no longer a guest in my own home. I was its keeper. That night, I sat in my armchair with old Patches purring in my lap, and for the first time in over a year, I felt a sense of profound peace. I had spoken my truth. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but I knew I had reclaimed the most important thing of all, myself. The fallout was swift. Just as I'd known it would be, the story spread through St. James like wildfire. The foundation was immediately placed under investigation. The same board members who had been so easily swayed by Jessica's tears were now the first to cooperate with the authorities. Her carefully constructed financial house of cards came tumbling down. The veteran's family had never existed. The business seminars were revealed to be luxury vacations. The expenses for Mom matched the receipts from designer boutiques. My whisper on that stage had opened a door, and now the whole town was seeing the ugly truth that lay behind it. A few days later, Jessica did return. Not to confront me, but to pack her things. We moved around each other in the house like ghosts, wrapped in a thick silence. She refused to meet my eyes. I didn't feel hatred for her, not even satisfaction, just a deep, weary sadness for a person who had traded her soul for the empty applause of strangers. I stood at the window and watched her car pull away, disappearing down the street. A chapter of my life was over. A new one, written in my own hand, was about to begin. A week later, a car with Florida license plates pulled into my driveway. My sister Carol got out. The moment I opened the door, she wrapped her arms around me and just sobbed. "I'm so sorry, Anne," she said over and over. I am so sorry I didn't believe you. I didn't hold it against her. Jessica's lies had been coated in sugar, while my truth had been bitter and hard to swallow. We sat at my kitchen table for hours, and this time, when I told my story, she listened. Carol stayed for a few weeks, her warm, bustling presence chasing away the last of the lonely shadows that had haunted the house for so long. Pastor John came to see me too. He sat in the very same chair he had occupied when he'd advised me to be more trusting. He looked 10 years older. He admitted he had been blinded by the beautiful image Jessica had created. I failed as your shepherd, he said, his voice heavy with remorse. I listened to the story, but I failed to listen to the heart of my parishioner. I forgave him, because I understood that sometimes even good people can be fooled by a good story. My life slowly found a new rhythm. I took back control of my finances, and my own bank statements started arriving in my mailbox again. I rejoined my book club, and with a new, state-of-the-art hearing aid Carol insisted on buying me, I could hear every word. But my greatest joy was returning to Max's garden. I spent hours out there every day, my hands in the soil, pulling weeds, nurturing the rose bushes. My back ached and my fingers were stained with dirt, but my soul felt clean. Every new green shoot that pushed its way up from the earth felt like an affirmation of life, of rebirth. I don't think much about Jessica anymore. I don't wish her ill. I just hope that somewhere, somehow, she learns a different way to be. My legacy, I've decided, will not be about money or property. My legacy, like Max's, will be a life lived with honesty and quiet dignity. I've started writing my story down again, not in a secret notebook, but in a proper journal. I want my granddaughter, Lily, to read it one day when she's older. I want her to understand that the greatest battle we fight is not against the enemies of the world, but the battle to keep our own small voice from being silenced. One morning, while sorting through some old papers, I found it. The travel brochure for an Alaskan cruise that Max and I had always dreamed of taking. We were always putting it off. Next year, we'd say, we'll go next year. Carol saw me holding it. You know, she said gently, we could go. And for the first time in a very long time, instead of thinking of all the reasons why I couldn't, I just said, okay. We booked the trip for the following summer. It was more than a vacation. It was a promise to myself that I would no longer postpone joy. So now, this is where I sit each morning by my window, with my cup of coffee, looking out at my garden. Max's old oak tree stands tall and strong. The new roses I planted are beginning to bud. Sometimes I think about that night at the gala, that moment with the microphone in my hand. My voice wasn't loud. It was barely more than a whisper. But sometimes a whisper of the truth can be louder than 1,000 shouted lies. And that is the hope I want to leave you with, that even when you feel small and invisible, your voice matters. You just have to find the courage to speak your own whisper. Now that I've finally been able to share my whisper with all of you, I find myself wanting more than anything to listen to yours. I know, a lot of times when we sit together, stories just pour out like a stream. Today, I wanted to open my heart a little, and I would be so grateful to hear your stories in return. You know, sometimes just a simple click on a screen, a like, a subscribe, or a share might seem like a small, fleeting gesture to many, but to me, And to other quiet voices that need to be shared, each one of those clicks is a small ray of light in the darkness. It's a silent way of saying, I see you, I hear you, your story matters. It reminds me that we are not invisible. A simple click from you is a powerful statement of support for me, and it gives me the strength to continue sharing these stories. After my story was told, something changed in me. For weeks, all I wanted was for someone to hear my voice. And now that you have, I realize that what I want most is to hear yours. Down below, in that comment section, I would be so honored if you would share a piece of your story with me. Tell me about a time you felt unheard. Tell me about a passion you have that others might have dismissed as silly. Or tell me about a moment you found your strength, even in the smallest, quietest way. I will read them. I will carry those stories with me because your story matters. We want to build Sapphire Revenge as a community where we can share these stories that come from the bottom of our hearts. I know you have your own private stories that can be difficult to share, even with the family or friends. I am here to listen, to share in your joys and sorrows, because we all have the right to be respected and to be heard. And if you don't have a sad story like the one I've been through, please share a happy one, like a small joy you experienced today. Please share it with me. It will be a tremendous source of strength that helps me and everyone else watching this to heal and find faith and motivation in our lives. If you happen to be watching this on a television, please don't hesitate to pick up your phone and search for my channel, Sapphire Revenge. I truly hope to share these feelings with you. Let's build a community where we can share our truest emotions. Let's make this a place where we listen to one another. A place where no woman has to feel that her life, her struggles, and her triumphs are invisible. Thank you again for sitting with me. It means more than you know.